Okay.
Okay, folks, welcome to the Healing the Healer After a Personal Loss. My name is Don Belaw. I'm a member of the National Loss Team Conference Planning Committee, and we welcome all of you to this noon lunch and learn conversation. So our conversation today will be addressing a variety of ideas and tips that we can utilize to help our loss team members heal after a personal loss of some type. These are folks who are our friends and family members, if you will, who work together providing care and comfort to those who have lost someone to suicide. But those of us who are loss team members can experience losses, and we need each other's support as we move forward. We appreciate all of you who are joining. We ask that you place your email contact information in the chat box, if you would, to help us identify who's attending and give us an opportunity to then share with you some ideas and resources later on. This session we're attempting to record it, so that hopefully it'll be available for those of you who wish to look at pieces of it in the future. It will be posted at the Nebraska Loss Team website under the resource tab. So once again, thank you for joining us. Our presenters today do include the esteemed Frank Campbell, the founder of the Loss Team movement, as well as a variety of loss team members from across the country who will be introducing themselves in more detail as we go forward. Those people include Glenn Stevenson from Ohio, Noah Whitaker from California, Sandra McNally from the Southwest Arizona, Krista Fritzen, who is from Nebraska, as well as Renee Zimmer. And Renee Zimmer will be offering an opportunity for any of you who wish to express any comments or concerns about anything at all in the private chat box. So Renee will be fielding any questions or comments that, on a private level that you wish to chat about or wish to have someone reach back to you. So we appreciate you joining us for this luncheon. So I'll turn this over to Frank Campbell, who can go ahead and begin, and I will Frank is driving the car, but I'm going to be steering it because I'll be sharing a PowerPoint that Frank will guide me through. So Frank, should I share that screen right now? You're on mute there, Frank.
Okay, is it off?
Yep, you're off, Frank. So should I share the screen?
Yep, go ahead.
All right, we'll do that.
So I'll apologize ahead of time for any technical glitches. I'm caught en route between Lexington, Kentucky and Baton Rouge, and I pulled into a Pilot gas station and trying to steal their Wi-Fi. So I'm sure there's going to be some glitch along the way. If it becomes impossible, Don, I'll just check out because I don't want to interrupt the rest of the program. Let me just say to all of you that this is not the program I would have ever planned to be doing. It's so sad for me to share with everybody that one of our top associates and long-term loss team leaders and collaborators and trainers took her life, and that's something that some of you have learned about, but Leslie's death has had a tremendous impact on everyone. And when we talked about in the planning sessions about this lunch and learn, I thought it was a good idea, and the rest of my colleagues felt so too, that we might talk about what do we do when somebody we've looked up to as a leader, someone who has been there for so many, finds their way back towards suicide as a cause of death for them. When, as any of you would know, I would have I would have said that if I had to name 100 people I knew who might die by suicide, Leslie would not have been among the ranks. And so it's been a difficult time, but the problem that I had was trying to help myself look at how often we as caregivers have not added new coping during the pandemic. And the only place I could really go for help in understanding this was to return to crisis theory. So Don, if you'll put the crisis theory slide up there for me. What I'd like to do is remind everybody, give me a couple of clicks until you get to hazardous atmosphere. So it's one, maybe one more right there. Now, let's stop there for a moment. We all have remembered, I hope, that stressors bear down on us all the time. And that if our coping is appropriate, then we stay at kind of a mid-range in coping. And even though new stressors occur, as long as our coping can support those, then we realize that we can probably continue to maintain that average level of coping. But it's when new stressors arrive or supports leave that we become more vulnerable. And I don't think we talk enough about this aspect of crisis theory. So Don, click one more time and let the supports come underneath. Now, quite often we agree when we do this activity with people that one of the stressors, for example, could be a family member. But that family member could also at times be a support. And in the example I usually use when I teach this, I say something like, it's not enough to know that someone has a spouse. It's more important to see whether or not the spouse is identified as a support. Now, here's what I think I can make some presumptions about when it comes to Leslie. I think Leslie had a great deal bearing down on her, just as many of us do, and she had adequate supports. But what I do believe happened in Leslie's case is additional events happened with no additional supports added. And those stressors that I can at least name would be the death of her mother-in-law, quickly followed by her receiving COVID, then by other family members dying, including her brother, who was both at times a stressor and a support. And as she approached the 10th anniversary of her sister's suicide, something in the way of almost a gravitational pull, I think, drew her toward thoughts of suicide for herself, because she was struggling to cope with these newer stressors. COVID, in my opinion, has been a very unpredictable thing to cope with as far as a stressor. Some people have had long-term residual problems, and those problems have included increase in different issues with mental health and sleep. And I'm thinking that COVID as an underlying stressor needed more resources brought to bear to help her cope with that when these other deaths occurred at such rapidity and with such significant deaths, leaving her to be just herself and one sibling and her whole family extension. Now, certainly her husband and her daughter were fantastic resources to her, but some of their attention and encouragement for her to get additional help was being rebuked. And that kind of faulty thinking, I think, for me, described where Leslie was. She was up against a wall, not able to cope with certain things, but also not really ready to admit that she needed extra help. And when Leslie Culver died, the thing that I thought most of is she had a fantastic mask, because I went back and read emails that she had sent to me just a few days before her disappearance. I talked to other people that had talked to her on the phone, had communicated, and Leslie definitely showed us the to live side. Everyone she cared about got to see the to live side and future oriented statements and planning about what we were going to do and when we were going to get together in the future, all the while planning how she might take her life on this trip having scheduled, I think, in her mind to die on her sister's anniversary. So that that plan, once in place, I believe, had the power to pull her toward it. And had we all been able to exercise any support prior to that, there's a possibility we might have been able to thwart that. But it reminds me so much of William Styron, who said that he was celebrating the Pulitzer Prize while all the time at a restaurant with family and friends, while all the time later planning how he might kill himself that night. And that ambivalence is something that is so seductive when it comes to suicide that it says to me all of us have to triple our efforts and be extremely deliberate about our self-care. So today's workshop was planned around that idea of who takes care of the caregiver. And the short answer is we do. And we also take care of each other. And so those of you that are doing lost team work know that this is something we stress, the need for self-care. So Don, if you'll advance a little bit here, I think the PE for her was the death of her brother, whom she had been more like a parent for since her mother died by suicide and she was a young girl. Her older sister had pretty much raised her, so when her sister's suicide happened 10 years ago, I think that role modeling became intrinsic for her and somewhat intractable, and maybe something she did not share with anyone. I know she didn't share it with myself, and we talked about her losses many times. But what I believe happened was a decline in her coping, coupled with maybe some alcohol and things that allowed her to cope and sleep, and also more seductively take her toward the thoughts of suicide. So even though I think her ambivalence was present up until a few hours before she left and disappeared, so go ahead, Don. I think the reality is we didn't get a chance to help her. Her crisis left her in a place where she completed suicide. And so go ahead now and complete the crisis theory for me, Don. Went beyond that suicide ambivalence, and instead of being able to get the help that would have restored her or increased her coping, she ended up with maladaptive coping, and that maladaptive coping led to suicide. And we know that suicide is a outcome that is possible whenever stressors exceed the ability to cope. So that's my best roadmap, I'm afraid, for all of us. And Leslie, should be a lesson we all take to avoid getting to that place where we make bad decisions or decisions we otherwise wouldn't make. So I want to remind us on the next slide, Don, that crisis theory follows an example of talking about self-care. And so as I've been doing some workshops this last 3 weeks around the country, I've been really highlighting this section. And so Don, if you'll put up the next click, we'll see the 4 areas of the stool that represent coping. Now, these have been compromised by COVID. So what I'm suggesting to you is that the pandemic, the pre, the post, and the re-entry phase of this pandemic that is so difficult to navigate and know what to do, has left us confused and perhaps not even aware how much our previous coping has been compromised. So when you look at A, one leg of the stool is your participation in a supportive community. Well, the pandemic has removed a great deal of that from all of us because we can't really interact and participate the way we would like to. Some folks have been very creative, found different ways to connect in their supportive community. Physical well-being, I know for a fact that Leslie was struggling with the physical side of this post-COVID. She had had a lot of reaction to the COVID that was continuing in her life, and I think her physical well-being was continuing to worry and scare her if it would be permanent. But our control over daily activities, this has been probably the most compromised that I know of, because people are maybe working from home, may not be as solid as it was before. Even getting up, getting out of bed and making the bed may not be something that is a requirement in their life. So that, I think, is a big factor that needs to be looked at with all of your attention. And the last is productive and creative life. Now, see, Noah talking, so I don't know if I lost y'all or are you still there, Don?
You still have you, Frank, no problem.
Okay, okay. So that last one, productive and creative life, I know that Leslie had given up a lot of the things she loved to do. And so much of that was involved in her supportive community. And with her physical well-being being compromised and her daily activities being lost for that moment, I think her stool collapsed. And the weight of additional stressors and the compromised reality from the pandemic created an impossible scenario for her to survive past. So I would like to dedicate today to Leslie as a lesson for all of us to go back and revisit what we're doing with each leg of this stool so that we might ensure we won't join her. I know that's not what she would want for us. And I certainly don't want that for any of us, including myself. So Don, that's what I wanted to share this morning. And now I look forward to hearing the other members for the Lunch and Learn share their information.
Well, thank you, Frank. And one of the comments you made in a conversation we had a few weeks ago, I think it's important for everyone sitting at the table today, and I'll attempt to quote you as best that I can. You mentioned that all of us as lost team members need to be deliberate in what we do and recognize that we are all at risk in doing this work. And I think those are important words for us to remember as we support each other in our lost team work. What we do makes a great difference to those that we care for, but by the same token, this is a club that we weren't particularly invited to. We just happened to become members of the club. And so as a result, we are vulnerable. We're vulnerable to experiencing losses, whether it's a personal loss due to the death of a friend by suicide or death of a friend that as a natural course of life and death, or some other crisis that we might experience. Our level of vulnerability is intensified. Would you agree with that, Frank?
I would, definitely, Don. And I'm hoping that we'll have some other insight from the other participants on the call. But so many of you are new to this work. I know it must be difficult to learn this, but this is the first time that I'm aware of it losing anyone to suicide since we began in 1998. And that doesn't mean there weren't some, but it's the only one I know. And it's certainly at a leadership role, it's the only one I'm aware of.
Okay, well, thank you, Frank. And we'll move into the next presentation, and that'll be led by Glenn Stevenson from Ohio, who is also part of the team that developed this particular presentation. So Glenn, if you can go ahead and begin, that'll be great.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, Frank. It's truly an honor to be here with everyone today. My name is Glenn Stevenson. I'm with the Columbus Lost Community Services. I've been with Lost since the beginning. It's an honor to join with Denise. This is her slide presentation. Excuse me, we are giving an example of self-care. I am leading this discussion on her behalf, and hopefully that demonstrates how we do demonstrate self-care to those who are around us. So we're going to talk a little bit more about self-compassion. So if you want to go ahead and start with the first slide, Don. Self-compassion does precede, we want to go back one slide. I'm sorry, you did say that the slide was a little
different,
goofy there.
Yeah.
That's okay. You can go ahead and go back one slide.
That's what I have. Sorry. Okay.
That's okay. You're fine. Yeah, Denise found a really beautiful graphic on this where it's the fuel tank on a car, and there's an icon of a person just pulling back. It's on empty, but he's pulling back that needle, he or she. And I just love that graphic. And we're going to talk about that in a future slide, is how do you recognize when you're getting close to empty. But getting back to self-compassion, that does precede self-care. So think of self-compassion. What is compassion, right? It's when you just can't take it anymore and you just want to help. And we have compassion for others. Well, self-compassion is treating yourself like you would treat your friends. You know, how would you talk to your friends? That's how you would want to talk to yourself. And a lot of us do neglect that. A good resource is Kristen Neff, who has a website, selfcompassion.org. And she teaches mindful self-compassion. But again, she talks about some of those tips on having that compassion towards yourself. And it's how you treat yourself. It's self-care, but self-compassion is how do you talk to yourself? What are those messages that you give yourself? So recognize your self-critical thinking and, you know, make sure that you're adjusting that and recognizing it. And sometimes that means whether it's journaling or just having your internal dialogues, recognizing those self-criticisms. We'll move on into the 4 common work tapes for caregivers. And this comes from Dr. Wolfelt. And I'm not sure if anyone can see my screen, but he's got a really good book called Companioning You. It's a long title. It's a soulful guide to caring for yourself while you care for the dying and the bereaved. But Companioning You, if you remember that, you'll find it. And we can give that resource too. But he talks about these work tapes. We do have some examples that we have on the slide, as well as one that we've added. And think about some of the other work tapes that you may have. A work tape is something that it's your subconscious that you're telling yourself. For example, I have to be available all the time. You know, people can call me day or night, doesn't matter. You know, am I presenting right now? Do I take a call while I'm presenting? Absolutely not. Another work tape is if you're resting, you're lazy. A lot of times we do that in our society that, you know, if you're not moving, you're not getting something done. But you do lack effectiveness when you're just being busy. No pain, no gain, going the extra mile. You know, we tell ourselves that, well, we just got to try a little bit harder. Or the tape of if you really care, you'll go beyond the call of duty. You know, that goes back to overextending yourself and always being available to everyone. For people who are bereaved, you know, you can say, well, it's been so many years since my loved one died, so I should be able to do this. Well, the consequences of all these messages is you just wear yourself out. It takes physical and emotional toll, as we know. You lose your work-life balance. You don't have that downtime to recharge. Again, just because you're busy doesn't mean you're effective. You're just constantly working hard. You're not giving yourself that oxygen mask so you can put that oxygen mask on someone else. And it can turn you into a martyr. So yeah, if you let these messages take over, then you're going to lack the self-care that you deserve and that you need. We can go on to the next slide, Don. Thank you.
Fairly out of order. Sorry.
Nope, I think you're okay. Yep. How to identify close to empty. So again, another good resource, Paula Davis Lack. She runs the Stress and Resilience Institution, and she teaches how to deal with stress and being resilient, in whether it's personally in your organization, a business. She does offer training. Talks about 3 big warning signs. As you can see on the slide, chronic physical and emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and ineffectiveness. you get to that point of, are you thinking, what's the point? Why do we do what we do? And we are all at risk, but, you know, kind of to piggyback on Don's comment and Frank's comment that we are at risk, we can also, you know, for those of us who are advocates for suicide prevention, we know the complexity. And we do know that there is illness that, if you look at any other illness, we always ask people, if you're struggling with an illness, there is treatment. And many times you can treat a terminal illness and lead a joy-filling life. You can have joy. Does that mean that you're going to prevent that illness eventually? I think the key to what we do is we provide that hope. We really want to give hope to people that you can have a life of joy despite the pain and the sorrow that we suffer. But again, these three big signs kind of ties back into that. If you're running on empty, those are the signs that show that. You're just, are you getting more ill than you commonly would? You know, if you hardly ever get a cold, but you're just finding yourself just beaten down all the time. So what do you do about that? So look at your priorities. Are you yourself one of your priorities? Are you able to separate yourself from work? Do you have that work-life balance? Are you constantly talking about suicide in your life? Or do you have a part of your life where, you know, that's not the focus of what you do every day? How about things you normally enjoy? Frank talked about that too, that, you know, things that you normally would enjoy are just not on your plate. That's not what you're doing. You react big to the small things. Does every little thing cause a crisis? So what are ways you can help identify and help with these things? First of all, be transparent. We need to be accountable to one another. And we're going to talk more about that in today's session, but how do we look out for one another, but also be accountable? Because ultimately we are responsible for ourselves. Can you motivate yourself? You know, going back to those work tapes, what are some of the positive messages that you can give? Remember your circle of control. I don't know if anyone's ever done the control circle, where things that are in your control are in the circle. Things that you can influence might be on the edge of that circle, and then things you can't control are outside of the circle. So focus on things you can control. Don't let the uncontrollable overwhelm you. And what do? You talk to these things with a trusted friend, coworker, boss, doctor, mental health provider. We all know those resources. We give those resources to everyone else. So we have to practice what we preach. Denise mentioned in her notes when we talked about this, instead of having a to-do list, how about a ta-da list, which means focus on your wins. What are the successes that we've had? And we like to do that in Columbus with our Lost Community Services, because we keep thinking we've got so much to do. It's like, what have we done? We've had so many wins in the past. Do that for yourself too. Recognize those things that you've done. And basically, we want to build a culture of well-being and resilience. We want to do that within our organization because we have to demonstrate that to those that we serve. And then we can go into the last slide, Don. And our last slide is really just to get us into the next segment, because we are going to do a deep dive into self-care. But there are things listed on this slide, but we use debriefing a lot with what we do. I'm a first responder on our team. One of the things we do multiple times is we debrief with the team after an event, and we debrief with staff after an event. And anytime we need to debrief more, we debrief. So debrief. But that goes back to being accountable and talking to one another, not putting on that mask. So that's pretty much all I have. I think this can get us over to Noah and his team to talk about self-care ideas. And, Yeah, we'll probably also open up if people want to put some of their self-care items in the chat. I'll leave that up to Noah to see how you want to handle that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Glenn, and I appreciate your comments, and also the fact that we encourage all of you who are listening in today to feel free to put in the chat room any ideas in terms of self-care, be for us to share and with each other and with our lost teams, because as we said before, part of healing the healer, and I see ourselves as being healers, is being able to take care of ourselves, identifying what's necessary, and then surrounding us with supportive people who are willing to point out to us that we need to take a step back and to take care of ourselves. Sometimes that energy that we have to try to help others, we tend not to invest into ourselves. And so we need to be attentive to others when they do point out to us when we perhaps are not taking good care of ourselves. So thank you, Glenn, for your comments. And again, if you have any questions for any of the presenters, please put it into the chat, and hopefully we can respond to that by the end of the hour, or we'll reach out to you by email with an answer to your question or comment. So I encourage you to do that. For example, there was one question from one of our people at the table that asked, what does it mean to be safe for a lost team member? And I think that's a great question. In our next section with Noah, Sandra, and Krista and myself, we'll address that in some detail. So thank you, Glenn. And Noah, I'm going to have you go ahead and begin, if you will, with your part of our conversation. So Noah, go right ahead, please.
Howdy, folks. First, I think I'm just would be remiss to not say how grateful I am to be in front of a group, especially a group of almost 80 people this morning, which is really exciting. I think this is a next chapter in our lost work nationally. And so it's great to have you all here this morning. So my name's Noah Whitaker. I come from Central California in Tulare County. And a shout out to some of the folks that I see from our community, as well as our neighboring communities who joined us this morning. We started our journey with a lost team around 8 or so years ago. And this notion of self-care has been really important, especially among our core team, where I see Darcy's here today as well, who now completely oversees our suicide prevention efforts as well as our lost team. And we've had a lot of conversations among our core team about where we're at personally and where we're seeing our team members at, and do we need to step back? Do we need to step away? How do we kind of care for ourselves and keep ourselves healthy? And do we need to oscillate our lost team between active, postvention, and delayed responses just simply based off of our capacity? So part of that is this sort of look at post-traumatic growth, which has been discussed a little bit already. And post-traumatic growth is a relatively new concept still. It really, in its kind of more current or modern state, was founded around 1999. And this is this sort of notion that after a traumatic experience, as you work through it, as you process it, as you bring in new tools and new coping mechanisms, you can come about and have positive psychological change. But I wanted to kind of take that next step, which is the step beyond post-traumatic growth and into another term, which I really adore, and it's this post-traumatic wisdom. And post-traumatic wisdom is this sort of notion that after you've kind of gone through your traumatic experience and you've had this period of growth, and you're in a relatively good and healthy space, now you can bring about what you've learned, what you've processed through, and you can apply it into helping others. And this notion is that the trauma really becomes a central element of who you are as a person. And the way that the trauma has changed you is integral to how you move forward. And that's really the notion of how loss teams operate, is folks that have entered into post-traumatic wisdom that are in a healthy and stable enough place that they can take that energy and funnel it into helping others and helping others get guided into their healing journey. Now, this notion, it's also built on this understanding that's sometimes referred to as the triune brain or the three-part brain, where if you just think of the structure of the brain, you have your reptilian brain, which is your instinctual level of brain. That's where your thoughts and your reactions first come from. You touch something hot, your hand jerks back. You see something dangerous, fight, flight, respond. In the midbrain, or your limbic system, this is where your emotions and your memories are stored. This is part of the reason why when something happens, you can also become very emotionally upset, because first fight, flight, freeze, etc. Then this sort of emotional connectedness to memories and change. And then the third and top part of the brain is the neocortex, or your thinking part of the brain. And it's good to really think of it as Dr. Bruce Perry calls it an inverted triangle, because anything that happens to you, an experience, it really goes through that process from the bottom, the mid to the top. And there's that time element too. You instantly respond with the reptilian brain. Next, your emotions come about and your ties to memory and your limbic. And then in your top brain or neocortex, you can think about it and you can process it. But you can't really get to that processing level until you're clear of the immediate crisis at hand. And so it's this top level brain where we develop this post-traumatic wisdom, and it connects back in with our feelings, our emotions, as well as our natural responses. So one of the ways to look at this and apply this through self-care is to also turn that phrase a little bit and borrow a different psychological term, but in a different way, and that's self-regulation. So it's this notion, as was discussed in the previous presentation, sort of as a gas tank. And to me, the way that I like to think of this is, and I'll just kind of carry forward with an analogy of a car. To me, when I hear a term like self-care, it makes me think of washing my car. You know, for some people, that's an important element. For me, I can get to it in the next 3 to 5 years, and my car will be clean when I wash it. Otherwise, the rain takes care of it. Self-care seems far less important. But self-regulation is essential. And carrying that analogy of the vehicle, the regulation is your gas tank. And if you don't look at your gas tank and you don't keep up on your gas tank, and sorry, Monica, I see the comment. I'm actually presenting without slides. Part of the notion of our meetings are also meant to be less like formal presentation and a little bit more fireside. So that's the notion if I just didn't build in slides for it. But again, this gas tank notion is if you're not paying attention, if you're not taking care of the needs of your vehicle, which is you and your emotions, you'll run out of gas. And unlike a car wash, gas is essential. You have to have it unless you have an electric car, in which case you need a charge. But either way, you have to keep your vehicle fueled or it's worthless. It's the same as yourself. So think beyond self-care, which can be done at almost any time, and think more of self-regulation. What can I do on a day-to-day basis to keep my gas in my car or my electric car charged? What are the small steps I can take to move it forward? Because just like was mentioned with the airplane analogy as well, and the dropping of the masks, if you are not taking care of yourself, you cannot take care of others, and you're not demonstrating post-traumatic wisdom, which is essential for a healthy loss team. So now I'll pass it along to our other panelists for this segment, and I'll stop talking. Oh, I did want to mention as well, if you want to learn a lot more about this subject in particular, I heavily recommend a book by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. And they actually do have it as an audiobook too, which I think is the preferred method of consumption, because you get this great dialogue between the two of them, and they really explore this subject. So I'll put the links in chat, and first I'll plug Amazon Smile, which if you're not aware of, you can link your Amazon account through Amazon Smile, designate a charity, so a portion of each of your purchases go to that charity, and it's a great way to help fund your local loss team. So set up your Amazon Smile, help it to benefit your local loss team, and pick up a book like this. It's a really fantastic listen. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Noah. And you certainly shared some great ideas in terms of looking at post-traumatic wisdom and how it flows into self-regulation. And your resources you're going to put in chat are great. I see some other folks agreeing with your comments. Also, I encourage anybody who's sitting at the table, put in the chat any kind of recommendations or thoughts in terms of ways that you have discovered as helpful to you and to lost team members to move forward as we go forward. So we'll turn it over to Sandra if you want to chat for a bit about your segment here. Thank you, Sandra.
Sure. Thank you so much, Don. Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra McNally. I'm from Impact Suicide Prevention Center in Arizona. I oversee our Survivors of Suicide program and our Lost Team program statewide. Our program has been around for a long time. It was founded back in 1988, our Survivors of Suicide program, and we started our Lost Team program about 10 years ago as part of our larger Survivors of Suicide program. So today we're talking about healing the healer. Being part of a lost team can be rewarding and gratifying. Lost team members have the passion to help others and the ability to sit with people in their darkest moments. This takes real courage and real commitment, but the work also can be emotionally taxing and challenging, being on call, working long hours, sitting with another's traumatic pain. It requires real attention to our own functioning and how we are being affected and possibly triggered. If we are feeling distress and don't address our own feelings, it can result in an impaired ability to function as a lost team member and could result in our own declined mental health. So there are challenges we as lost team members will encounter personally, including our own losses. We are trained to help others who are grieving, but when we ourselves are experiencing grief, it can be really hard. It's crucial that we stop to process our feelings. By failing to honor a personal loss, we won't be able to truly move on and heal. And if we are trying to help others, but our life is in turmoil or out of balance, real problems can occur. So we cannot focus on the needs of others while neglecting our own needs. And I know that happens sometimes where we feel like, you know, as long as I continue helping and plodding along, I'm going to feel fine. But that's not the way it works. We cannot neglect our own needs and help other people in lieu of that. So after a loss we experience, it's vital to take a step back, to acknowledge the loss, and to determine how you are affected and how best to address the grief. So look for ways you are affected by the loss: emotional, physical, mental exhaustion, isolation, disturbed sleep patterns, eating patterns, declined concentration, self-medicating, overlooking personal needs, headaches, physical complaints, intense pain, depression, anxiety. It's so important to look at those signs to see how you're functioning, what's happening with you. The next step, it's important to reach out to other members of your lost team, to your colleagues, not only for support, but for further assistance. Frank touched on this, you know, I think it's important to not wear that mask and to pretend like everything's fine, to really be honest with those around you. It may be necessary for you to take a step back from helping. I remember my father died back in 2009, and at the time I was running a grief support group at a local senior center, and I remember thinking, I don't think I can do this. And it was a little bit of a turmoil for me, but I made the decision to step back for a few months and not run that grief group. I found it incredibly difficult to be paying attention to other people's grief and pain when I was experiencing so much pain myself. And I think for most of us that would be true. It's hard to sit with others in their grief when we're experiencing intense grief ourselves. So consider stepping back, whether it's a loss or something else happening in your life. Think about how you want to handle that. Also, make sure that you're processing your feelings, you know, with loved ones, seeking professional help, going to a grief support group. Try not to do this alone. And as Noah shared and Frank shared already, and as well as Glenn, practice self-care. Self-care entails a combination of self-awareness, but also that self-regulation that Noah mentioned. Establish healthy balance in your life, healthy eating, exercise, getting a good night's sleep, but also engage in healthy hobbies and joyful activities. I can't emphasize that enough. I work with so many people that what do they do in their spare time? They volunteer, they help people, they're doing grief work. It's constant, their whole world revolves around helping or grieving people. And I really encourage you all as part of your self-care to find joyful activities that have nothing to do with helping others or working on grief. So as a participant of a lost team or survivors of suicide program, also think about establishing a peer support program for your volunteers and for your team members. At Impact, we started this years ago, probably 10 to 15 years ago, and it's something we do on a monthly basis for lost team members, for facilitators of survivors of suicide support groups. We meet for peer support. It's not counseling, it's not professional help, but we work as peers and really talking about what's happening in our lives. And we support one another. It's a safe place to make sure that everybody's okay. So I really would encourage you to instill some type of program like that in your existing program, because it really holds people accountable. And if someone's really going through a tough thing at home, at their job, they've experienced a recent loss, as peers, we can say and encourage, maybe you need to take a step back. What can we do to help you? What we can do to support you? So remember, your grief, your loss won't go away by helping others with their grief. Be kind to yourself and take the time you need to heal. The work will be waiting for you when you're ready to return to it. So that's all I wanted to share today. And again, I thank you so much, all of you, for participating today. It's a really great turnout, and we're so glad that you're with us as part of this panel. I'll turn it back to Don. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. You covered a lot of great tips there. And could you spend just a minute or two talking a little bit more about that peer support process that you have put in place and some of the activities that you do?
Absolutely. So once a month we meet, our volunteers meet together once a month, the first Monday of every month. And we instill peer support as after the business meeting, where whoever wants to stay can just join in a discussion about what's happening. And really what we do is just go around the circle, or on Zoom meeting, go around the squares, and everybody just shares what's happening in their life. So it's a time for people to really be honest. And they're there because they want to get support from their peers. Recently, one of my volunteers, she lost her son probably 10 years ago to suicide. She does a lot for our agency, and her husband suddenly died in a car accident. And so she was able to use peer support just to really talk about what was happening. It's not in lieu of her own counseling. She has her counselor, but really for us to be able to support her, and what do you need, and how much time do you need to take a step back? And other people are having stressors with COVID, with things that are happening on their job. And it's just a chance, again, for people to share what's happening and to not keep that part of their life a secret. I think so much of the time we wear that mask and pretend like everything's fine. This is a chance for people to be honest. So as leaders of your survivors of suicide program or loss team, you can instill this as a once a month type of meeting. And again, it can happen over Zoom, and people just go around the circle and literally just share, hey, this week was really hard for me, or this month, this is what I'm going through. And we support one another. And I think it's a good checks and balances system. And I think it's good for people to have a safe place to talk.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Appreciate
You're
you
welcome.
sharing that. And as we kind of move towards the conclusion of this hour of sharing ideas and ways of helping healing the healer, again, I request that any of you sitting at the table have ideas in terms of activities, processes that help your team members heal as they move forward. Please share by putting it in the chat box. I want to speak for just a minute or two about the topic it's not really focused on enough, and that is perhaps giving gratitude. letting our team members that we appreciate them for everything that they do. And simply saying thank you goes a long ways. Acknowledging their service, their investment of time is part of a way to let them be valued, to feel that they're valued so they can move forward as being part of the team. As Sandra talked about a minute ago, when a lost team member experiences a loss of some sort, and it could be the loss of good health. In the team that I work with in Lincoln, Lancaster County, lost team, we've had a couple of individuals experience loss of health due to COVID and also due to other issues. And that's a loss. And so our team have rallied, have reached out to those individuals, let them know that they're valued. We appreciate everything that they do, and that they're part of our lost team family. So as we move forward, I think those sort of efforts help us heal the healer. So it's important for us to remember that we're all vulnerable to the forces of the wind or nature. Like COVID is a very strong force that's blowing across our faces right now across the country. But still, if we band together and work together, we can move forward to keep ourselves together. Lost teams are groups of people who are drawn together because they want to help others be able to move forward with their lives and to minimize the pain that's experienced the loss of a loved one that they have had. And so we're turning our loss into actions. And so I commend all of you at the table today, taking the time to come in and listen to some of these ideas that we hopefully that you'll be able to take back into your own lost teams. I wanted to kind of close in the next couple minutes with a couple other thoughts, and that is that the National Lost Team Conference Committee will continue to have quarterly lunch and learns on different topics. And we invite any of you sitting at the table today, if you have a topic that would be of value to experience some training in the lunch and learn session, please put it in the chat box or email me, and we'll share that with the committee so we can develop programs that are useful for you and your lost team members. Also, I want to mention to you that tentatively in 2022, the National Lost Team Conference is planning and having an in-person conference in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And those tentative dates are October 17th and 18th, 2022. So you might take a little note, put it on a little post-it note. The conference committee will be sending out to you information in the coming months about the program in terms of what that may look like as we go forward. So in the chat box, I did put in the Nebraska Lost Team website, where we'll put the recording of today's lunch and learn. I see where we have in the some tips regarding 101 self-care tips booklet that Tulane County has put into the chat box, so please take a look at that. What we'll do today, we'll condense all your comments and all your suggestions into a synopsis, and we'll send that out to everyone who put their email addresses in the chat box, so you can have that at your fingertips. So please go ahead and place into the chat box your email addresses and any other resources. We'll leave the chat box open for the next 10 to 15 minutes if you have any opportunities to add that. So I'm going to kind of scan and see if how we're doing here. Oh, I see folks are saying, hey, we're looking forward to seeing face to face. I hope so, that we can be doing it at that time. One other resource that I want to share with you is the Alliance for Hope website. It's a great website for suicide loss survivors. Be sure your lost teams have that as part of your resources. And of course, AFSP as well as AES has got wonderful resources for your lost teams to to take a look at. So please do that. So with that, folks, I appreciate your attendance. We had at one point close to 100 people participating. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat box. Thank you for all your great work. And on behalf of the National Loss Team Conference Planning Committee, thank you for joining us today. Have a great day.